Welcome to the Decades Reloaded community podcast, the Mental Health Mixtape, where we will be talking all things mental health related in every aspect of life, connecting with local communities and fitness professionals. We're here to start the conversation around mental health and make a difference. So join us, take a listen and be part of the conversation.
There we go. Hello. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good. So, welcome to the Decades Reloaded community podcast, the Mental Health Mixtape. We've obviously had a good chat already, but just for anyone who is listening today, let's just tell us who you are, a little bit about you, and why I might have invited you onto the podcast today.
Okay. So obviously this month is Men's Mental Health Month. And obviously there's a clue in my name. I'm Shawn Leek, but my organisation is called the Mental Health Runner. So there's a big clue in the name, obviously, why I'm here. Now, I've got a big, long background in sport, really. So I was a professional golfer for 14 years and then been engineering. But then my other passion has been running, obviously, with the clue in the name. Running many marathons, ultra races, that sort of stuff. I even did a mad event of 7 marathons in 7 days back in 2015.
Wow.
And that's something we can, I'll talk about in a little while, but it's one of them things that with my sporting background, being as a professional sportsman, everything's about really pushing yourself as far as you can go. A lot of it was, for me, I wanted to prove something to myself as well as others. Maybe there's lots of different things. But yeah, that's a little bit about me at the moment. And we'll talk about other stuff as we go. So.
Yeah, great. So most people, especially locally, will know you as the Mental Health Runner. And you run a fantastic running group alongside other things and have also been a recipient of a few awards. I mean, like Coach the Legend or Champion.
Yeah.
You got from Heart as well, didn't you? From Heart FM.
What's that?
Heart as well gave you an award.
Yeah. So that's long ago. It was about 2016. I was given an inspirational award by Heart FM back in the day. That was for when I'd done my 7 marathons in 7 days. I raised £11,500 for the hospice at the time.
Wow.
And like I say, with doing the 7 marathons in 7 days, they followed me all week on what I was doing. But what's quite bizarre is the stuff we're talking about is quite unbelievable, because people often looked at me from the outside at that time thinking I had everything in the world and everything was wonderful. And actually, almost 9 months after that, I ended up trying to take my own life, and I think that's the bit that's quite unbelievable about the story, that I was doing all these amazing things and people all looked at me and thought, wow, this guy is amazing and all that. Like you say, getting an inspirational award, you're being looked at and put on a pedestal. But the reality was I didn't really realize it, but the running was almost holding me together. And that's part of the reason I do what I do now, because the awards I get now, it's lovely, don't get me wrong. What we were talking about a minute ago was around that, but the awards are brilliant. But I do this because I'm passionate about it. I do it because I care. I do it because I don't want somebody to go through something that I went through. I know how that feels. I know how difficult that is. And when I do talks at events now, the one thing I talk about is like emotion, because when I do the talk on my life story, I'm emotional. I find it difficult because obviously there's memories in that are hard. But the thing I really use is what people see and what is reality, I think, is the thing I try to get by, because being a professional golfer, running all them wonderful things, people really don't know what's going on personally for that individual. No. And I think that covers men and women 100%, because it's one of them things. We see what we want to see, but we only give out a certain amount of signals as well. I was very good at hiding it. I was very good at getting through. But the reality was I was struggling. And, when I stopped running, which was probably about, it was about the October of 2016. So I did 7 marathons in 7 days, 2015. And in 2016, I was running ultras. So I was doing like 75-mile race over 2 days, 100K, 50k, really long races. And I was doing a race called the Saltmarsh 75, which is in Essex. It's around the basin of like around Southend and that sort of area, coming up to Heybridge. And I did day one. I'd done it before, 75 miles over 2 days. So I'd run 38 miles on day one. And I was traveling down to the next bit, which started around just the other side of Malden. And I was traveling down with my family. They were going to drop me off, and we were traveling down. The car broke down, and I couldn't get to the start line. And it was almost like we had to wait for the AA and all the bits because we were on a main road. I couldn't leave my family where they were, and I never got to do the race. And it was almost like that was part of the journey where I started to fall apart a little bit. It was almost like I couldn't fulfill my needs. I couldn't do what I needed to do. And the people sent me a medal, which I threw straight in the bin when I got it, because to me, I didn't deserve it. I didn't deserve to have that. But it was almost like after that, I then stopped running, just totally just stopped. I just didn't feel I had it in me. I think I was burnt out. I was lots of things. But from the October to around the December, the demise was so rapid and almost like not acknowledging it, hiding it from people, self-harming, to the point of around, it was early December, I then tried to take my own life. And it's, you know, people can't, when they talk to me, they're like, wow, I can't believe that was you, when they talk to me now. But I think that's why my story is quite powerful and good for people, because they can see that, my God, I can't believe you were there, but look at you now. And that's the positive part about it. That's what I always try to say to people. Yeah, it's a tough thing to hear, but it's positive as well. Do you know what I mean? It's that journey, that year, and that 9 months, I was in and out of psychiatric care. So I ended up in Colchester for the first time for around 5 days. And then I managed to survive outside in what I class as the real world for probably around another 4 months. And then around the end of April time, I tried to take my life again. Ended up in Harlow Hospital, psychiatric care again, which was horrific. Horrible place to live. I really struggled, and I discharged myself after 3 days because I knew I could. And then the last time, which was around the end of May, I tried to do it again. And this time I ended up having everything pumped out of me and all sorts. I was not in a very good place at all. But when I came out, I was threatened with sectioning. So anyone who knows what that means, basically means you take everything away from you and you're under their control and looked after. You can't discharge yourself. But I knew what that meant. And I said, well, if I got my own will and I was willing to stay for a set amount of time, would it be better? And they agreed that. But the problem was there was no beds available near where I lived. And I got sent to Bristol, which is 300 miles away from where I live. And I can honestly say when I was going there, I felt alone. I felt nobody cared. My family were doing this for my best interest. But for me, it was almost like everyone's letting you down and almost doesn't care about you. But that's because of how you feel inside. It's not actually, it's part of the illness. And again, I know that now and I can talk about that and understand that and trying to get other people to understand it. But when I got there, what was unbeknown to me, I was actually being sent to a private hospital. And it was purely because there was no NHS beds. So I got put into a private psychiatric care place. And the actual resources, what I got access to, were totally different to what I'd had in the other two places. So when I was in there, I got to eat in a nice restaurant. I got proper food. I got access to things like yoga, Pilates, gardens, different treatments. And it almost like was something that I needed, but I didn't know I needed, if that makes sense. It was almost like I was there. I mean, I remember the first day I turned up there, I was on the floor in my bedroom crying because I was just couldn't deal with it. And I had somebody actually sat with me while I was in there, as against in the other places, I didn't have that. So I almost had like a starting point where somebody was actually giving me a bit of time, which again, a lot of the places you're in without being horrible, they don't have the same resources. And this is why I'm so passionate about what we're going to talk about going forward, how important social activity is, physical activity, nature, all of them things, because that's what almost was my starting point. You know, like the yoga thing was unbelievable to me, because there was a lady that kept trying to get me to go, and I kept saying, no, I'm not going, not for me. I'm as flexible as a bit of wood, because I'm not understanding what it is. I'm thinking this isn't for me. And she got me to go. And I remember going the first time I went, didn't get it, wasn't letting go, I was resisting in a way.
Yeah.
And then the third time I went, and a lot of it was seated yoga. So I was sitting there, and I remember the lady grabbing hold of my shoulders, and she kept telling me to breathe, and to breathe from down here. And I was like, I am. She said, you're not letting go. And it was almost like as soon as I breathed properly, my body just dropped. It was almost like my shoulders just dropped. Yeah. Yes. And this is the bit that I try to say to it. We carry so much. We always do, but we don't know we're doing it. And I think like this is why I'm so passionate about all of these different treatments, because yeah, they might not be for you, but have you actually really given them a go? You know, as an instructor that, sometimes the hardest bit is getting the person there. But once they're there, it's the thing. And, like I say, that's a little bit of an insight into, where I've been, what's happened to me. But like I say, it's massively positive because it's brought me to a magical place. If you take the work I do now, I'm doing something that I love and I get rewarded by it, and actually if it changes one person's life, that's all that matters. That's the ultimate thing. You're not going to change everyone's life. You're not going to make it, but if you can make it a little better every time you see them, you've done your job. That
reward and fulfillment is so vital to where we sit along the mental health continuum as well, to keep us on the up rather than starting to drift back towards the other end of the scale. And I love that you spoke about being resistant going into a yoga class, because yoga is one of those classes, and it's the same as joining any other type of class or going into a gym or going for your first run or anything like that. It's absolutely terrifying for people, and getting over that initial barrier to going along. And like you said, you needed somebody to keep sort of going, come on, you should come along. Come on, you should come along. Until eventually you thought, fine, I'll go along. But then you were still holding that resistance within your frame and your shoulders and just not being able to let go. And you clearly had an exceptional instructor who was able to identify that really early on with you and encourage you to just let go and drop that resistance. But from that first session, it's so hard to judge your first experience based on how you feel that time, because you walk in there with the fear of the unknown, all these blockers in place that you're almost not open to the experience because you've still got that fear that's just swept through you that you can't actually, it doesn't matter what it is, like when you dance, when you run, when you walk, you can't release your emotions or how you're feeling if your body is flushed with cortisol, putting in fight or flight defenses because it is a strange, scary new environment. You have to get through that stage first. Then you can start to enjoy the experience and reap the rewards from it.
That's the hardest part, though, isn't it? Because, like, I mean, I come from a coaching background with my golf and all of the other stuff I do, but I'm a running coach as well and stuff like that. But I think the big thing is making people understand that people are different and what people enjoy, but also how people cope with different situations. Because, like you just said, their fight or flight is a classic example. So the anxiety levels in that person are going to be through the roof because they're in a new environment. Who do I speak to? What do I do? Can I do it? All of these thought processes are going on. But it's almost like you've got to sometimes give people a little bit of time and actually almost like spend a bit more time with them and actually say to them, look, you're doing really well with this. Almost like reassurance, because from a child, we all need that. We need that when we're growing up. That doesn't change as an adult, because when we're going through difficult times, reassurance, most of us are seeking reassurance for things we do. But it's also about just trying to understand people's needs. We are all different, but ultimately we're trying to all do the same thing. So we're all trying to make ourselves feel better, whether it be because you want to look better, because you want to feel better, because you just literally want to be social, you want to, that type of thing. Is trying to find the outlet that's right for you. But the trouble is with us as humans, we tend to think, well, because it works for them, it should work for me. That's not the thing. The more options we have, like what you're talking about, yoga, walking, running, going to the gym, going fishing, going, whatever that is, there's no right or wrong. It's just trying to find the avenues. But I mean, it's just the hardest bit for a lot of people is themselves. because we tend to hold ourselves back. We tend to look at what we think works, but instead of sometimes when you do walk in a gym or walk into a class or into a group, actually, if you give it a bit of time, it could make a massive difference to you.
Yeah.
But it's having the right instructor or the right support to allow you to flourish, I think, is the big thing. Like you said, that person who was with me in hospital, I saw her every day. Don't get me wrong, I was going in every day. And she sort of started to see things in me that realized that actually I can help him, but I've got to let him help himself a little bit. So it was almost like when she was talking to me about breathing, I said, I am breathing. But I wasn't understanding what she meant. It was almost like she had to break it down a bit for me to almost like say, look, no, breathe from here and then actually just let your body go and just really deep breaths and all of the other stuff. Because I mean, I was scared. I was scared because I didn't think I could do it. I thought that I'm going to make myself look silly. All of the stuff that we all think inside, but nobody really talks about. She could see that in me. So she could see that I needed to do something, but it was almost like I was holding me back. It's really bizarre. It's the human brain is so powerful. That's the hardest part. It controls every action we have. I was having a conversation yesterday with a group, and we were talking about, do you talk to yourself? And what I do is ask people to put a show of their hands up, and people look at each other as if to say, do I? And I think there's about 15 people there, and I would say about 8 of them put their hands up. And I just use the analogy, did you think about what you were going to have for breakfast this morning? Did you ask yourself what you were going to have for breakfast? I said, yeah. So will you talk to yourself? We do it all day, every day. But we see it as negative because we look at it as like, oh, you think you're mad because you're talking to yourself. That's not.
More of it's the first sign of madness if you're talking to yourself.
I know, but we do it as human beings all of the time. Even when we're doing this, we have got something in here that's thinking what we're going to say next and what we're going to do.
I mean, I've got ADD, so I've got about 200 thoughts going on.
Exactly. So But it's scary because people look at it the wrong way. But actually, when you start to put it in layman's terms and normalize it, which I don't like the word normal, but it's almost like make it so it is like we all do it. It's not unusual, but it's just seen as strange because when you say you talk to somebody, like you say, you do think of that route. But it's not. It's almost like that's part of the process, because that's what stops us doing stuff, isn't it? When you look at it, the only person who stops us is us when we say, "Well, I can't do that because I don't know if I can do it," or I won't get on with the people there, or all of this other internalization that we do. But he's trying to what I see as my role now is what I do. Obviously, activity based and all of that stuff is what I do, but very much about trying to normalize mental health as actually, look, we all have mental health. There's no competition on that. It's not on like top trumps. It's just about trying to understand each other and say, look, we can help one another if we work together. And, like the stuff you're doing is great because you'll open up the avenues for people to do different things, as I do. And, ultimately, if it doesn't work, there's signposts that we can give to other people that can open doors to them, because there's always an option. That's the hardest part, like what we were talking about before. When you feel you have no option, it's really tough place to be, but actually from experience, like with yourself and mine, hopefully we can give that message across that, where we've been, it might not be the same as your story, but actually I have a little bit of an understanding how you might be feeling, because you can never put yourself in somebody else's situation, but hopefully if you can show your vulnerability to somebody else, that does help people.
And actually, whilst we train instructors in Decades Reloaded, we have a real lived experience group who share their own personal experiences as part of the training, so that there's kind of a fundamental flaw in my side of the sort of physical activity sector with fitness instruction. There is mental health awareness in physical activity qualifications that you can do, and you can do a mental health first aid qualification. That doesn't relate to physical activity, and the two don't really join up together. But then the whole world right now is very eyes on exercise for mental health and well-being, with an industry full of exercise professionals that are still very heavily focused on weight loss.
Yeah.
Because that makes money. But their clients are approaching them with mental health concerns because they have been told that if you go to an instructor, if you go to a fitness class, if you go to a gym or a PT or a sports coach, that they will then be able to support you with your mental health through this idea that the physical activity will help you. So then, as fitness professionals, and coaches, there's this with the doctor, the physio, the counsellor, and everything in between. But the people that the clients are going to for advice don't either have the lived experience themselves, or enough training to relate what they're teaching in their classes or they're training their clients in against actual real mental health scenarios. So kind of just try to bridge that gap a little bit and bring it all together so that when people attend a class, they can either be safely signposted, because most people in most industries, to be honest, wouldn't know as and when they are allowed to breach GDPR.
No.
They would just assume because they're all trained you cannot breach GDPR.
Yeah.
Unless somebody is a harm to themselves or somebody else.
Yeah.
So that applies as well to mental health.
Of course
most
it
people
does.
don't realise that. So because they're told you can't discuss somebody's medical condition under GDPR. So what do you do if you've got someone that you think is going to be a risk to themselves? They've made it abundantly clear that they are definitely thinking about suicide, and at the point where you think those thoughts and idealizations turn into actions.
Yeah.
And if you think that there becomes a real risk of action, you can then seek support from the correct areas, and that would not be a breach of GDPR.
100%.
So, but not a lot of people in my industry and many others don't realise that they can do that. So we've just tried to kind of make that confidence there. So you haven't got to save somebody's life by physically being able to offer them a counselling or a therapy session of some form. You need to be able to either identify that they need help and they're not going to go out and get it themselves, or signpost them, or just, those little things like getting over those barriers to just take part, and identifying that it takes several times coming to be able to actually fully let go and immerse yourself. And even then you might be holding on to something, and it takes that knowledge to know that actually most people adhere more to these things if they come with a friend first.
Yep.
They're more likely to return once and they're more likely to socialise within a group of strangers if they've got a friend with them to socialise with them.
Oh, God. I mean, quite often, again, this comes, and I always say this comes back to the child part of us. We want support. We just often don't know how to ask for it. And I think, like as a trainer, a coach, whatever, I do believe the role of the coach or the trainer is really to try and be understanding to everybody's needs, because realistically, like if you take, my daughter's autistic, so I have a lot of involvement in that area, and I have a lot of people that I come across in my daily job with special educational needs and whatever. But the thing is, I almost try and allow people to be who they are, to flourish. And then you do find the magic happens, because you're almost like you're giving them the space to evolve to how they feel comfortable. And like you say, in a class, you might have somebody that comes who is incredibly quiet. That might be just how they are and how they get on. And actually, the more you get to know them, you start to understand that. Yeah, it might raise a red flag because you'll be looking at it and going, whatever. But actually, as you start to speak to them and find out how they are, they're getting the best time ever. Don't get me wrong. Just because it's not how I would see it, doesn't mean it's wrong. But actually, having that conversation is fine to have. The problem is with a lot of people, they don't want to have that conversation.
No.
And that's the best thing you can do to somebody, is actually acknowledge them and say, look, are you okay? And then, I mean, I've had many people on the walks that I do, and I find it unbelievable. After about 3 weeks, I had a lady come up to me once, and I'll never forget it. She said, I've been coming 3 weeks and I've not really spoken to many people. But she said, it's not because I'm rude. She said, I just don't really feel like I can yet, she said. And she goes, I love coming. I said, and I want to keep coming. I said, well, keep coming. I said, are you enjoying it? She said, yes. And after about 6 months coming, she then grew into that and found her own route, found her own friendship groups and whatever that be. But it was almost like she was trying to justify to me that actually I'm okay, but she felt comfortable enough to do that. That's what I saw as a positive, but also that she's confident enough to say, look, I'm okay and this is what I do, but because most people would look at that and go, well, she's miserable, she's not talking to anyone or whatever, but she's getting exactly the same out of it that the person's talking to everyone in the class and wanting to know everything about the class. We all know them people, but it doesn't mean that they're struggling anymore. It's sometimes about learning your clientele, your people skills, and almost having that angle that you can look at other people from a different perspective, because we only see what we want to see. That's the thing. And I think, like what we've talked about a lot with the coach and the instructors, yeah, you can do as many training courses as you like. I truly believe you can, but it doesn't always give you the right perspective, because you sometimes have to have been there to experience it, to understand it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you have to have gone through that, because some people have got that empathy and understanding through different experiences. But I think you have to be a certain person to be able to understand that on everyone's level, that you're not going to connect every single person, but you can help them in whatever way it is they need to be helped, by listening, signposting, like you say. There's so many different ways, but counselling, I truly believe counselling is great to a point for certain people, but I truly believe we should be doing more therapy with big people outside, more with activity-based stuff. Like me, I do stuff now with people on a one-to-one basis where I do like therapy. I'm a life coach and stuff, all the other stuff I've done in coaching backgrounds. But my stuff is about just getting people out in nature, no eye contact. You're not having any eye contact. People are a bit more open and honest. They can talk about freely about what they want. When I did counselling back in the day and I went to counselling session, I'd sit there most of the time looking at the clock thinking, is this nearly over? Because it's a controlled environment where you feel on high alert. You know what you're expected of. As against, you get people in an active area, an open area, all of them things, the barriers start to come down for people. So you feel more relaxed, you feel safer, you feel that actually I'm not being listened to, or whatever it might be. And, it's just trying to understand that we're all different, and actually trying to give people different options. Like when I talked about therapy early on, having different options was great for me. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but it was almost like I was in this environment where I might as well do something because I'm here anyway. And that's why I talk about it probably to so many people, because, have you done this is the question I would always ask somebody. And most people will say no. And you sort of go down that route of why have you not? And a lot of the time because they think it doesn't work for them, and I said, have you tried it? It's like food, isn't it? If you think about it, we look at food sometimes and go, ugh, no. But have you actually tasted it? No. But we're very easy of doing that. But that life is like that. We make choices without touch or stepping.
That fear of the unknown again, isn't it?
It is, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's almost like the analogy I use is that almost holds you back a little bit, And that's where, like you say, using a friend or all the other bits and pieces is quite good, because them barriers that you might be holding on to is like, yeah, they're doing it. Maybe I can, and I might give that a go, and it might change my life. That's a big statement, but actually some of them things do change people's lives. They do, because they find something that they're passionate about, gives them that new lease of life. Like what you were talking about with work, you realise once you got into that, hang on a sec, Lucy's back, because Lucy feels happier. Lucy feels all of these other bits and pieces. So Lucy becomes a better mum. She becomes all of these other bits and pieces because she's more positive. But you're going through the motions doing that because obviously, like what we talked about earlier, you're seeing the end goal of that's what I think I should be doing, but you're not getting that fulfill of needs. And once you start to understand yourself and get that, hang on a second, I feel like I'm me again. It is a funny situation, but
They're so valid. So just to sort of fill in a couple of gaps here, we had a conversation offline about how I became a fitness professional and got into dance, and how, for those that haven't heard my background before, I found that having given up dance, that I'd suppressed myself as a person for a long time, and that's what caused my BPT to really spiral and become something that I was a lot more aware of as an issue, rather than just thinking I was a little bit different to everyone else. And when I rediscovered dance-based exercise, I felt I'd sort of brought myself back. And we were saying about how it's just one of many types of therapies that are available. So I didn't really get on like yourself. I had talking therapy where I've seen two or three lovely counselors over the years, and I used to say, oh, I'm going to go and have to pretend not to cry now for another hour, and it's going to be so exhausting. And that
Yeah.
is because I personally hate crying. It's not that I'm embarrassed to cry or anything like that. It just makes me feel yuck. It gives me a headache. It makes my eyes hurt. It makes my nose rank. I just don't like doing it.
Yeah,
So you then go and have to sit there for an hour, and somebody says something that really taps into me as well, and I'm like, it's harder to hold it all together then. And I think, some of them I did get some real good out of. I can't pretend that I didn't. Others not so much, who were more active listeners rather than proactively counselling me. I think there's a bit of a difference between.
There is a difference. There is, yeah, massively.
And that wasn't really for me, even though I think I quite like feeling noticed and listened to, like most people do. I don't need somebody to repeat back to me the same words that I just said to them for an hour. So that wasn't really my thing. But then dance and exercise, leave it all there on the dance floor. It's all out.
But that comes back to the same thing, doesn't it? You know what works for you. You know yourself better than anybody else. Don't get me wrong. I could say the same to you about counsellors. I had many different counsellors, but I had one lady in particular. She was brilliant. She challenged me. She sort of fulfilled my needs in actually she wouldn't take what I just said. She would question it. As against, I had many that would just listen to me, nod their head, and all sorts of stuff. And don't get me wrong, that will work for certain people. I'm not saying it doesn't, but I think what you almost have to do is almost find what works for you. And like for me, I knew like activity-based stuff has always worked for me. It has, but it's almost like looking at different activities and thinking, look, anything's possible here. And actually to start opening up them doors and thinking, I mean, I did a 100-day challenge where I put a post up on social media a couple of years ago. And I was at work and I said, well, look, any challenge you set me, I'll do it. So it was holistic, it was active, it was all sorts of stuff. So I did things from bounce classes through to boot camps, through to hypnotherapy, doing reflexology, anything. So I did all sorts of stuff. And what I was trying to show to people is you can try anything. You just don't know if it will work. And I can honestly say the bounce class, the group I did, it was in Brightlingsea. And these ladies had never had a guy come to a bounce class before. And I went to do this bounce class. I mean, I'm 6'3", I'm a big guy. And I don't think I've ever laughed so much in my life. I mean, there was about 9 or 10 ladies in this class. And they thought it was brilliant that I was there doing it. And when I showed it to people and whatever, because I did a video on it, and the laughter I had and the fun I had, I could honestly say I did really enjoy it. But the reason guys don't particularly do it is because they look at it and just see it as a stereotypical, this is what maybe women do. But actually, you could get that same buzz out of it. Like what we could probably say about dance, you will have that. But I'm a great believer that, if you like it, do it. People often say to me, why do I go in cold water therapy? Why do I get in cold water? Because I like it. That's why I do it. I don't need to justify why I do it. If you want to know more about it, I can tell you, but I don't need to justify that. And I think I've learned that over time, that I can do that. But I think a lot of people almost like, I don't know because I don't know if I can do it. Do I fit in? Like you say about going to the gym, do I fit in? Is it something that, I'm going to be in my swimming costume, or I'm going to be in this or whatever? I'm going to feel self-conscious. If we were to all wear badges, all of us feel self-conscious in different ways. Some people more than others. I get that. But it's almost like if we had badges on us that say, I feel really self-conscious about my belly today, or I feel really self-conscious about my arms, or whatever it might be, I think the world would be easier because we would almost like see everyone's vulnerability and difficulties. But I think it's almost like
every time I was around a pool in my bikini, I could have a sign saying, I feel naked, please do not look at me.
Yeah.
Then I would probably feel so much better, although people would probably then be looking because they're reading it. But
yeah,
just if everyone could just close their eyes and imagine I'm not there, that would just be so much better.
Yeah.
And that sounds really silly to most people when I say stuff like that, but that's.
But what do other people say to you when you say that? Other people say, "Oh, you're amazing," you and all of the other stuff.
Yeah.
It
and I'm
doesn't.
like, "Oh God, no, that's not what I see." And
No, exactly.
The fact of the matter is, I feel really exposed.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. If we were to be a bit more open and honest about them situations, I would say majority of people have them hang-ups at times. You know, because whatever life things are throwing at us, we feel different. You know, like when there's, you know, like if there's been a bereavement or somebody's lost a job or there's financial difficulties, all of them things have a big bearing on how we feel as human beings. But again, we're not very good at talking about them either, because we almost like try and go through the motions. But the activities like what you're doing and I do and other people do, they're great outlets, but they're places where you can talk as well. Do you know what I mean? They're places where you can reach out and do that. And I'm always encouraging people to do that, you know, knowing that this is a safe space for you to talk. This is a safe space for you to, you know, try and find help and stuff, because you're there because you want to be there. You're trying to help yourself. If we can help you in any way, you know, brilliant. You know, is there something that's going on that you want to talk about? And I might know somebody who I can signpost them to or whatever.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's just somewhere where you can just let go and not have to worry about everything else. You know what I mean? Sometimes as well, because we all need that as well, don't we?
And you know, I think like it's a shame really you touched upon the fact that you don't often see men in a group exercise setting. So like the bounce class, the same with dance fitness classes, Pilates classes, yoga classes. You might get a couple more in like a weights class that's group based, like a HIIT class or something like that. Generally speaking, it's considered a really feminine thing to do. Like it's like a girl's place or a woman's place to be, rather than a men's place. And do you think that ties into then this? So we know that social connection is so good for our mental well-being, and that really is part of the formula of how the physical activity actually supports us, is doing it with other people. But men often choose to exercise alone.
Yeah.
Walk alone, run alone, gym alone. You see some of the younger lads now coming into the gym, and they'll come in together, 2 or 3 of them, and then they'll all train together and they're having a bit of banter, or lab banter as they call it, and everything else. Meanwhile, I'm like, oh, those men near me, go away. I'm going into the weight section today. But it seems so surreal that then they feel intimidated to come into the class environment, and they really shouldn't, because actually, first of all, if a man walks into a class full of women, the women get well excited.
I know, but this is the bit that this is what I don't understand with guys. Like, I mean, I suppose my biggest bonuses in the work I've done in the past, I've always worked in dual settings, so like male and female settings. And I don't see people as male and female. I just see them as people. So I treat them the same. So I talk to my group of ladies. They can have banter with me as well as the guys can. And what I almost try and judge it for them. But I think quite often guys think they can't be themselves in that setting. And I think they almost look at themselves and goes, you know, like you're saying, if you've got all of these ladies in there and you're a single guy, let's be totally honest with you, it's the perfect environment for you. But you're not looking at it from the right angle. But guys are very much like you're saying there, you know, when they train alone and stuff. My son's 18. He goes to the gym regularly, but he goes with his mates. Like what you just said there. I think the younger generation are better at it because they're connected by social media and all the other stuff, and they're constantly connected through phones and stuff. But they're very good now because when they do stuff like that socially, the gym is a social place. You know, it's not seen as a gym; it's a social place.
Yeah.
If
they
I
don't
look
go
back,
down the pub anymore for a couple of pints. They go to the gym to lift a couple of weights. It's the complete shift.
It is, because if you take me, I mean, I was 50 in June. When I was 50, I look back and I think, like, for me growing up, our social elements, I mean, I was playing golf a lot and stuff, but pubs were places where you socialise because that's how they were and stuff. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I wasn't a heavy drinker and stuff like that. I like to drink like I know anybody else, but it was more the case of, I suppose, that fulfilled your needs in whatever that was as a guy, you'd get your social connection. Where if you look at that now, we don't have that aspect anymore. So you don't really have many pubs that you could go into and drink in. So guys have sort of lost that element, but the younger generation have looked at it and thought, well, actually, we can create our own. And physical activity is big in most youngsters' lives now, in whatever way it is. But that's a social element. So they've sort of built that into that, as against the older generation, like my age, and even younger, even a bit younger and older. They don't know how to access that. They're a bit lost. And like you're saying, the amount of guys you see that will still go to the gym, but they go on their own. They don't go to a class. They'd never join a running group because they look at that running group and think, oh, well, I'm just going to do my own thing. And they're not you're right, don't get me wrong, they're being physically active, brilliant, absolutely wonderful, but they're not fulfilling the other part of that, which is like what we talked about earlier, the mental health side of that, of the social interaction, being around people, making new friendships and things like that, because, that's the massive thing. Like for me, I work around people all day long like you do. I need time sometimes now for me to be on my own and do stuff, which again is fine. But I also know when I wasn't doing that stuff, I needed that. That was probably part of the reason why I struggled, because I almost ended up having no social connection, which then made things worse. And I can understand.
I was thinking that when you were talking about going to psychiatric care, then like how you felt like everything had almost like everybody just kind of palmed you off a little bit. And
but that's how it feels.
I'm pushing you that way because they didn't care. I mean, they did care, obviously.
They did.
But when you're on the other side of that, actually, you feel like you've burdened them, so they're just pushing you off to somebody else. And then you are just this person who's struggling at the worst part of your life, and you're on your own. You've got no friends, no family. You're hundreds of miles away from home.
Yep.
And the food's rubbish, the bed's rubbish, the company's rubbish. There's nothing for you to do other than to stare at four walls. And then obviously, as soon as you were put into, I mean, the NHS are trying. We can't fault them for trying. With what they've got to work with. But then when you've gone into private care, just completely different outcome, just because those extra comforts were there.
People have more time. There's more staff.
Yeah,
there's more staff. There's more different options. I mean, I remember being in there, and the one thing I remember, I was in a mixed ward as well. That's the other thing about being in there. And I'd never been in a mixed ward in the two places I've been before, and that really benefited me. It's not for everybody. I would play Scrabble. This is the hilarious bit. I played Scrabble with this lady every day, probably 3 times a day. But it was good for me because it was my mental side, but I was having a social while doing that. But also it was getting me to get out of my own head, because the difficulty is, as you probably understand, when you are having those thought processes and feeling that low, you are so self-absorbed that you can't see anybody else or anything else. It's almost like all you see is the world will be better without you in it. And actually, like what you said earlier about, your mum and the other bits and pieces, them what I class as higher powers for people, like what they see, they're the things that almost bring you back to reality. Like when you're in them moments, and it's important to have those. Not everyone has that, don't get me wrong, but when you do have that, it's almost like there's a reason to go on. There's a reason to do these things, but people don't understand it because people think they've caused you this problem, but it's not. It's quite often it's the illness. It is the illness of that person. They're just really, really struggling, and it's not anything that anyone's often done to them. It's quite often many things. It's not just one thing, and it's sad because you look at it, and I look back at my journey, and I look back. People often say to me, "Do you look back at that?" And well, I used to look at my kids, and I used to think, "Well, God, what have I done to them with what they saw?" My son's 18. When he saw, he still knows about it. I obviously do a lot on social media. My daughter was young. It will still have had an effect, but it's actually taught them a lot as well now, because actually, like, my son and his friends do talk about their mental health. They talk to me about it. He'll ask me about a certain situation. So in anything, it's good, because what it's done is opened that door to that. And I spent most of my life when I first came out of hospital thinking what a letdown I am, and how am I going to do this or whatever. But again, that's because I was still ill. I was ill at the time. I wasn't well, and it's now that point. Now I understand that's why I felt the way I did, and I think that's that's the hardest part when somebody's really, really struggling to get through to them. People always say, oh, it'll get better. It doesn't get better like that. It's not how it works. It's a journey, and some days are worse than others. But, little by little, if you're doing the right things, you might go for a walk today. You might go for a run. You might go to a class. Now, they'll only make a difference for that hour, but that hour is a big, big thing. And actually the ripple effect and knock-on effect.
It breaks a cycle, can't it, as well?
Yeah.
And sometimes all you need is a little break in the circuit just to
go. That is what it is. It's a break of that circuit, because when people are normally not very well, they end up staying isolated, staying at home, keeping away from people.
The constant up here just keeps going and going and going.
Well, you ruminate constantly, don't you?
If there's something else to focus on, it really spirals.
Yeah. And it becomes uncontrollable. I mean, the analogy I used to use is like having a camera going off constantly with all of these pictures, but you can't see any of them. You've got all of this stuff going on, but none of it makes any sense. And unless you break that cycle like we're talking about, and the hardest bit is, in our line of work, is getting somebody there sometimes. A lot of the time that if we can get them there, they'll feel a little bit better. But it's getting them to there. And that's why probably we're doing the work we do, because it's almost like we know it will benefit. The more you put it out there, I class the work we do as planting seeds some of the time. Like when you put posts up and stuff, you're planting seeds in people's brains to think like when they're ready, they'll go with that. Our job is not to scream and shout at them and say, come and do this, you've got to do this. It's about giving them the idea to think, actually, this is possible. He goes to this or she goes to that. Maybe I'll go with them. And then from there, hopefully, it has a knock-on effect to them overall, creating them being fitter, mentally health, they're better as well. Socially, they're getting their interaction. There's so many benefits to it. But the trouble is, if you could bottle that and give it to somebody and say, look, in 6 months' time of doing this, this is how you're going to feel. It'd be really easy, but it's not that simple.
And would you agree that men are a harder, not market, that's not the right word, a tougher group to access because there is more stigma around men's mental health? Not so much now. Obviously, there's a lot more work now to try and eradicate that stigma. But historically, me man, me tough, me don't get upset, all that rigmarole that we went through for decades. And, this lack of talking from peer support, because you're going to have to fill in the gaps for me on the bits that I've misunderstood about not being male myself, but men banter to offload quite frequently rather than actually saying what's wrong.
Okay, so I'll give you a real good analogy. So when you go and see your friends, girls and stuff like that.
Oh, we go and go, oh my God, he took my head in, I've had enough. The kids are driving me mad. I can't do the dishes anymore. I'm just going to break something and we're done.
Yeah. But you also, as well, the other thing you do, you will ask how their partners are, how their family is, all of the other bits and pieces. We don't do that. The reason we don't do it is because we don't know how to. That's the real reason. We don't know how to ask emotional questions. We don't know how to access those points. So for us, when we go in and we talk about work will be very skirted over. How's work? Yeah, work's good. How's yours? Yeah, fine. We don't go into it because a lot of the time it's a stressful place. We're like, I don't really want to have to talk about that. I'm here because I want to keep away from that. And actually emotionally, if it's a difficult situation, I don't want to go into an emotional conversation because I don't want to look, as they class it, as weak. Like the terms we hear all of the time, people say man up or get on with it, or they'll get, they're terms that people say in jest, and again, don't get me wrong, they're used a lot in banter, what we class as banter. But banter isn't always banter when somebody's really struggling, because if you take the environment I worked in when I was in engineering, I worked in that environment and there was a hell of a lot of banter. I mean, I was a pipe fitter welder, so I was working on sites, I was working in all these different places, and to be honest, I wasn't really feeling good anyway. But it was almost like you do this stuff to fit in. You do it to feel like you get in. And when somebody says something, even if it's hurtful, you laugh it off because that's how we cope. But the trouble is, the more you keep doing that, it's almost like, how long is banter not banter? Because it almost does become bullying, because quite often it's always targeted at the same person, and it will be along the same lines. So, for instance, a term I could probably use when I was growing up, I can talk about it now. I used to get called lugs and big ears. Now, when I was growing up, I didn't realise, but that has a knock-on effect to you with your self-esteem and all of these other bits and pieces. But you're taught, even as from a young age of being a boy, I can't cry about that. I can't tell anyone about that. It's almost like you're just expected to get on with it. Now, there's many kids that will grow up, boys and stuff, that will go through that and then go into the workplace, and them same things will carry on. But eventually what people don't realise is that teaches that boy never to speak up, because that boy then thinks, oh, hang on, every time I've spoke up, I've had the piss taken out of me. I've been ridiculed for it, so I don't do it. But it's almost like your fathers, your grandfathers have always been taught the same thing. We don't openly talk about it because we're providers. We're supposed to look after everyone. We're supposed to hold everything together, which is absolute load of codswallop, but that's actually how we're processed to think. Yeah. But once we start to open that can of worms and say, look, it's okay for me to cry. It's okay for me to get upset. You know, the classic example, like for me, I remember when my mother-in-law died, I literally felt like I had to hold the whole family together without being emotional. Now, I was upset. I was grieving. I was going through all the same processes, but I was almost in my brain was saying, oh, I can't cry. My father-in-law's falling apart. My rest of my family needs me to hold them together. That doesn't work, because if you continue to try to do that, it's like having a load of bricks on something. The higher it gets, eventually it's going to topple over. It has to. Right. And the trouble is, being a guy is almost a tool that's what we're supposed to do. But it's not what we're supposed to do. You know, like what you're saying about going to a class and stuff like that. A lot of that is fear. The reason they don't do it, you know, because they feel like, oh, they're going to laugh at me if I say I go to a dance class. You know, they might absolutely love it, but they won't go because it's almost like, my mates are going to think I'm a bit strange for doing that, you know.
I think there's a little bit of misconception as well, that the only way for men to get fit and strong is to go into the gym.
Yeah.
And do just weights in the gym and not a great deal of cardio. And so I had Jake Quickerton come into my Pilates class, and then he actually put an Instagram story up straight after, going, that is the worst thing I've ever done in my life. That was so, not in a bad way, but that was so hard. People say Pilates, think Pilates is easy. That was brutal. And then he did another one recently as well about another one, and because he comes to the club that I work at, so and he did another one about how hard it was and how he hurt for like days afterwards. And it's such a preconceived idea that, oh, it's a girls' class and it'll be easy. And I think that's attached to a lot of group exercise environments.
100%. 100%.
I'm so glad that we get to have conversations like this, and people like yourself who are so open to discussing these things and talking very honestly about mental health and about the different types of therapy available, especially from something that we're both very heavily interested in terms of holistic and somatic therapy, and just using your body to release emotion and just get moving and be out in nature and all those things. Because if it wasn't for people like you, we wouldn't be starting to see this shift that we're getting now with this younger generation, who do feel like that they can talk to the lads more and they can socialise together in the gym, even if it's still on the gym floor. And we are getting people like Jake who are then openly talking about attending classes, and yourself running mixed running groups. It's slow and steady, but it's progress. And it is progress that I'm so proud that we get to witness as a generation, so that future generations, our young minds, will get to hopefully experience a much better journey throughout their lives with terms to their mental health.
Yeah, 100%. You know, like what you're saying there about, like, you know, having Jake or something like that go to something like that, it will only open the doors to other people, because, you know, the reason most people don't do stuff is because they would love to do it, but they're reluctant to do it. I mean, I could tell you some stories about cold water swimming. The amount of women that women do it, but there's not so many guys that go to the groups. And again, it's the group thing again. I think it's probably a little to do with it, but it's almost like, but if you put on a men's group, I mean, I go to a men's group on a Monday night. It's the first Monday of every month, and it's called a fellas forum. Now we meet up, and this Monday we just come back and we went to the No Name Bar in Colchester, where they've got pool, darts, table tennis, all sorts of different things.
Golf.
Golf. They've got all sorts in there. Axe throwing. But we went in there, and there's 15 blokes, all different ages, different bits and pieces. Now, we did a lot of the activities, but the biggest thing was, because we had the activities, it brought us together, and actually the conversations were great. And when you look at that, it's like an extension like what we're talking about at the gym, but it's a place where guys could just come together. You know, there was a couple of people having a drink, but not many. People were there for the social. And I think what's wonderful is having a group that men almost feel like they can go to does work for men, because men like to be, I think, sometimes with men, which again, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's because they have the fear of, can I go to a mixed group and stuff? And what I suppose with that group, what we try to do is encourage them to go to other stuff. And actually, because we go to the other stuff, that gets them to go to that. So it's almost like we might put on a few weeks ago, we took them to the golf driving range. We went, we've done fishing. We've put on a thing with a class. Oh, it was ages ago, probably about a year and a half ago, where we took them to do a class. I think it was a yoga instructor lady came in and we did it. And I think we had about 8 guys come to that. But it was purely because me and another guy who are open to doing this stuff said, look, we've done this many times. They gave it a go. And I think it's given them a controlled environment where they feel safe to start with. And then hopefully if someone's come away from that and then they look at that and go, actually, I will join a class. That's ultimately what you're trying to achieve. But I think with guys, what we try to do is listen to what they want. So what is it they'd like to do? We try and instigate that. And I think that's another key element to people's growth and stuff, because you're trying to give them what they need and what they want. And yeah, I can talk about all of these different things that I do. And if you want to come on that journey with me, I'll take you, but I'm not going to force you to do it. But these are the options. But if there's something different you'd like to do, I'll look into that for you as well. It's not a closed book. And I think that's the thing. And the more things you give to people, the benefit for people's mental health is massive, because the more tools you have in your tool bag, the better you're off you're going to be. Do you know what I mean? That's the ultimate thing. So
just as we wrap up then,
have
you got one piece of advice then for anyone who identifies as a man for being able to start a conversation around mental health, whether that be as somebody who is struggling personally or somebody who is concerned about someone else that they care about?
Okay, so there's 2 angles there. The first one, if you were worried about somebody, the one thing I would say is give them time. Give them time, give them a listening ear. Don't try to fix them. That's the one thing I would say to you. If you listen to somebody, you'll get a lot more from them. Gain their trust, give them your time. You can normally tell if somebody's struggling, because they'll when you're asking them stuff, if you let them speak, they'll keep talking. And a lot of the time it's given, especially a guy, a safe space, because walking, like I say, if you can take them out for a walk, or you can take them somewhere where you're relaxing and something they're going to enjoy to do, you're ticking the box for making them feel better. But on the other side of the coin, you're giving them a space where they're going to feel safe and comfortable, which comes down again, I always come back to the child thing. If you're feeling comfortable, you'll feel more open and talking. But for somebody who's struggling, the one thing I would say again is reach out. There is help out there. There's people like myself and other guys that do this work, but there's lots of organisations. You know, one of the big things I would always say to people, never ever be reluctant to call Samaritans or use the text service Shout. I used it many times. You don't have to feel suicidal. If you're struggling at any time and find that, they are just a listening ear. They're there for you and they will help. But the only way they can help you is if you reach out. So never ever think that you're not worthy of that, because you are. We all can have that help and support. But like I say, there's many groups. If there's anything going forward that I can help with that, you can find me on social media and all the other bits and pieces. And I can always signpost, and there's groups and stuff that I do. So, but that's the one thing I would say: just never think that you can't be helped, because you can, because there is help out there. All right.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for coming on. It's been wonderful talking to you today.
That's lovely. It's nice speaking to you as well.
Really vital conversation to be having. So I can't wait to share this with our listeners. So thank you for that. And I will put all the details about you and the work that you do below the YouTube video. And
I will come up and see if I can come. You'll have to invite me. I'll come to a class.
Absolutely, you're welcome anytime. Just wander on in, unless it's genuine or whatever.
I'll do a post on that, so that'll give everyone a laugh. So that'd be good.
Yeah, honestly, you would love it. You and Daniel will be thick as thieves.
Okay.
Daniel's a right. Male, you see. All right. Thanks so much. Speak soon.
And you, Lucy. Catch you later. Bye bye.